Lots of you want to talk about this as well. Linda Bond, where are you?
Is the Israeli targeting of hospitals in Gaza collective punishment or the elimination of terrorism?
So what we're seeing in Israel at the moment, it's the sort of... It's the kind of centre of activity at the moment, the Israeli army, where they are in the Al-Shifa hospital and around the Al-Shifa hospital, which is the biggest hospital in Gaza City. And the Israeli army is saying that they believe that there is a Hamas command and control centre beneath it, in the tunnels beneath it, and so far they've found some weapons which they say belong to Hamas. Danny, obviously you've got people in Gaza. What's your view?
It's collective punishment. We need to be clear what happened in Israel, what Hamas did in Israel on the 7th of October was horrendous. But what's been happening since then is also horrendous. I have, as Fiona said, we have 31 colleagues in Gaza. These are brave, incredible, amazing colleagues who I had the pleasure and privilege of meeting just a few months ago when I visited Gaza. They should be providing relief services, but they're running for their lives. We would normally be in contact with them constantly. We can't get hold of them because their phones don't work, the electricity isn't there. We would normally be telling the warring parties where our staff and civilians are so that we can avoid them being hurt. But no one is safe. And worst of all, we're in 2023 and food is being used as a weapon of war. Starvation is being used as a weapon of war. It feels grossly unfair that over 10,000 people, many children, are dying, and our political leaders don't have the moral courage to call for a ceasefire. I just don't understand that.
Juliet? No, I don't think it is collective punishment. I think Israel is engaged in a terrible war to remove a threat, a huge threat to its citizens. There are more than 200 Israeli hostages, including children, toddlers, babies, being held probably in tunnels under Gaza. No government could accept that an atrocity of the kind that Hamas perpetrated can go unanswered and can go without removal of the threat, removal of the capacity to perform an act like that. And also that could possibly leave its citizens to languish or at the hands of the most brutal terrorist group. So I think that it's completely unreasonable to expect any government to not respond and to try to remove this threat. I think that in terms of the hospital and the way that Israel's conducting this war, it is a very, very difficult situation. You have a densely populated city, urban area where basically a terrorist regime has embedded itself over decades. They have, deliberately used the civilian population as shields, put themselves under hospitals, under playgrounds, under apartment blocks. They suffer no consequence for that in terms of global opinion. It doesn't seem to dent support for them at all. So there's no incentive for them not to do that. And so the Israeli army is trying to perform an incredibly difficult task to make the country safer, to remove this threat, which, by the way, moving the Hamas regime would be an excellent thing, most of all for Palestinians who suffer the most from the kind of regime that they run. Unfortunately, it is a terrible situation, and Gazans are paying the price for what Hamas has done. But if you look at other situations where similar groups like ISIS have had to be removed in Mosul or in Raqqa, you've also had very terrible urban warfare in which civilians have suffered. And yet we haven't had this questioning of the mission that, oh, well, we could just leave ISIS in place, or there should be a ceasefire, which, by the way, will only ever be respected by one side, because we know that Hamas has never respected ceasefires. So you're effectively asking one side to unconditionally leave its hostages and leave this threat in place. We did not have that debate over ISIS because the world saw that ISIS was a great evil and it had to be removed. And I think it is exactly the same situation with Hamas.
All right, there's lots of hands up. Let's hear from someone. Man there in the glasses.
How do the critics of Israel think they should have dealt with Hamas after? Not go in or...
Not kill 5,000 children.
All right. Man here in the front.
I think Hamas must have known exactly what was going to happen when they killed the 1,400 people. And it seems to me that, like Putin, they're not interested in their own people. They're just interested in their own ideology.
Man there in the red.
I think that it's, this is a massively complicated debate, and passions are very high on both sides. I think for me the big concern is where does this leave the peace process? Where does this leave the two-state solution? Because actually, until we get peace, and you can argue that Netanyahu's an extremist, Hamas are extremists, they both do things to the other side, but actually, until we get people sitting around a table talking, people are going to keep dying on both sides, and that's where the real sort of worry for me is are we ever going to get a two-state solution and peace in Palestine, Israel?
Woman here in the grey sweater. You had your hand up.
Oh, sorry, I did, yes. I think one of the reasons that so many people have been killed in Palestine, Palestinians, is that there was just no time for them to get to a safe place. There weren't safe places. And so I think the continuous bombing has really, really taken its toll and driven the numbers up. So why wasn't the rest of the world demanding that time was given for people to move to safe places and to create those safe places? And just seeing the scenes that we see on the television of all the deaths, it's appalling.
Bridget.
It's devastating to see every day on our television screens the suffering of children, of civilians, what they're experiencing, and that's why we in the Lib Party have been clear we need desperately to see humanitarian aid getting in much bigger numbers than has been the case so far.
But what you're not doing, which is what Danny was saying, is Danny is calling for leaders to have the moral courage to call for a ceasefire, and Labour and the government too are not doing that.
Yeah, I don't support that approach. Now, I'll just come back to what happened on the 7th of October, which events are still emerging. And again, every day we hear further horrifying reports about the scale of the barbarity that Hamas inflicted on innocent Israeli civilians. And it is appalling and utterly shocking to read. And that's why I don't think it is achievable that we will get to a position of a ceasefire. Hamas have no interest in such a ceasefire. They are a terrorist organisation who have said that given a chance, they will do again and again and again exactly what they did to innocent people on the 7th of October.
So why
That's not
is
to
it
say,
that
however, that Israel has a blank cheque. That is not to say that Israel has a blank cheque.
Why is it that almost a third of Labour's MPs don't agree with you, don't agree with Keir Starmer, and voted for a ceasefire?
Because all of us...
Are they all wrong?
No, what we all believe is that we want to see more humanitarian aid. We want to see the release of hostages. We want to make sure that international law is respected. We all feel incredibly strongly about that. Who couldn't be moved by what we see every day? No one would fail to be horrified by the scenes on our televisions. But where we have a vote in Parliament and where there is a decision taken around the approach of the party, then it is right that those of us who are members of the front bench have a responsibility to abide by collective responsibility. And I'm very sorry that some colleagues were not able to vote with the Labour whip on that issue and therefore took the decision to step back from the front bench. But it is important, as Keir Starmer has set out in the speech he gave in Chatham House, we have a position and it's our responsibility to push the government for more, especially around humanitarian pauses. We do need to see that.
Right.
The US has been clear about that too. It's desperate.
Jacob. Is the Israeli targeting of hospitals, which incidentally the head of the World Health Organization has called totally unacceptable, is it a collective punishment or elimination of terrorism?
It is an attempt to eliminate terrorism. And the gentleman there with the glasses made absolutely the right point. What do people expect Israel to do after 1,400 of her people were massacred? A ceasefire is a victory for Hamas, because they will carry on. As Juliet said, they will not obey it. And to come to the hospital specifically, I'm going to quote from the Times, because I think it's important to look at this properly in terms of the Geneva Convention. Article 18 states that in no circumstances should a hospital treating the sick and wounded be the object of attack. Article 19 says that such protection ceases if the hospital is being used to commit acts outside its humanitarian remit. And the hospital, we have known since 2007, by a report from Human Rights Watch, that said that Hamas had fired a rocket at its Palestinian rival Fatah from the complex. And in 2015, Amnesty International, not a friend of the Jewish state, not a friend of the British government, said that International reported that the group used an empty outpatient clinic on the site to interrogate and torture people suspected of collaborating with Israel. So Hamas has been using the protection of a hospital to carry out terrorist-inspired interrogations and actions of terror. What are the Israelis supposed to do?
Jacob,
what would the British government do? What would we ask our armed forces to do if there were a hospital being used in some part of the United Kingdom as a base for terrorist outrages? We would, of course, send in our forces to stop it. And there is a dreadful moral equivocating about defending the right of Israel to protect itself from these evil attacks.
Danny.
Jacob, I don't think anyone's questioning the right of... I don't think the question here is about the right of Israel to defend itself. It's about humanitarian law, and I'm glad you brought it up, because that same article talks about everything feasible needing to be done before a hospital is targeted, that the combatants must take precautionary measures, and most importantly, must be proportionate. You know, the WHO head said earlier this week that a child is dying every 10 minutes in Gaza. 6 children in the course of recording of this programme. Is that proportionate? Is that the right response to what's happened in Israel?
Is providing incubators for newborn babies.
But there's not the fuel to power the incubators.
But what is providing battery-powered ones
saying.
as it happens? What is proportionate to people who have stored Kalashnikovs in a hospital? That they will come out with and shoot you with, and they will cross your border and kill innocent people, out of all things, a peace rally. What is proportionate when people are murdering and are preparing to murder? What are you supposed to do? You say you're absolutely right. You made the fundamental point. What do the opponents of Israel expect her to do?
Woman here in the green. Hang on, let's get a microphone to you. There you go.
I think it's really interesting that you just said that they're providing incubators when we've just heard that there's no electricity.
They're providing battery ones. So that seems to me... the Israelis are trying to minimise civilian casualties. Of course they are. Dare I say, much more than we tried in the Second World War, when we were dealing with a fundamental threat to our nation.
Hang on, because I think, Danny, you don't agree with that.
Absolutely not. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places on the planet. There is bombing going on all over the place, including the so-called safe zones where people have been urged. You know, Al-Mawasi at the south of Gaza is where people are being told to go. It's an area the size of London Heathrow Airport. And we think 1 million people are going into an area with absolutely no infrastructure, absolutely no electricity, little food, no running water, no sanitation. This is not proportionate. This is collective punishment of people who had nothing to do with what happened in Israel on the 7th of October.
I'm going to squeeze in another question.